Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of my trip down memory lane back to the Pacific Crest Trail and my thru-hike exactly 10 years ago. In the last episode we hiked to South Lake Tahoe and then took a 5-day break there over Independence Day. And on the last morning we went to the post office, took all our resupply packages there and sent them off. We did resupply for the whole of Northern California because the places we would be passing through now only have very small stores and they are relatively expensive, and you can really save a lot of money if you shop in larger towns and then send the food by post. Yes, and then we drove back to the trail, shuttled by a former hiker from the year before, and he was the only American I'd met who rode with gears, as many people, I was told, there can't do at all. And of all the people, he was smoking pot while driving the car. He had the bong between his legs, between his knees, and smoked from time to time, and it was a bit adventurous, but yeah, he rode with the gears on, and he drove us back to the trail, and I thought it was a really funny thing back then. Yeah, on the trail itself, when we started hiking again, it was a bit difficult to get going, I would say. But after a long break, it was a bit exhausting because the body shuts down apparently relatively quickly and thinks, oh God, thanks, it's finally over. And is then taken by a surprise when it suddenly has to get going again. But the first few miles, as you can see here on this path, were relatively easy to hike, and then we soon arrived at Echo Lake, a really beautiful lake where there were lots of people. It seems to be a popular destination for many day hikers from South Lake Tahoe. And but we hiked to Aloha Lake in the evening, I think it was called that. But this is still Echo Lake, I think. Let's take another look at it. Yeah, it's just beautiful. So we were out of the High Sierras now, but we still had a little bit of this High Sierra environment. But later in this episode, the terrain would change significantly. But I always loved lakes, camping there, taking a break there. That's just my kind of environment I like. Yeah, this is Aloha Lake up here, and we camped there after we left South Lake Tahoe in the first night, and it was actually one of my favorite places on the whole PCT. I thought it was really nice with this little mini islands, these rocks in the lake, and it was really nice somehow. The next morning we crossed this mile marker, the 1,100 mile marker, quite quickly after getting up. And so we are really far now. And Northern California, I think, has another 600 miles or so in store for us, yes. And in hindsight, Northern California, I have to say, was definitely the most boring part of the entire trail. Maybe that won't really show up here in these episodes because, of course, I didn't take any pictures of the boring stuff, and I don't really remember much about them, but I do remember that I was bored quite often in Northern California, and I remember that there were quite a lot of burnt zones, and when you walk through these burnt landscapes, it's kind of depressing, and I am sure I'm going to talk about this a lot in the next few episodes. But this part of the trail started really nicely, and this is one of my favorite panoramas from this stage. I remember taking a long break up here and just looking at it. It was simply beautiful to look into the distance and let your mind wander a little, and that was always really nice. I actually like doing that on every hiking trip I do, just sitting somewhere and staring into the distance. Then we just walked on, and somehow I don't have that many memories of this episode, apart from a few things that happen in a while. But when I saw these pictures, for example, I cannot remember that at all, but it just looks super beautiful. And I think back then I probably really enjoyed this view. But in my memories, there is more negative stuff from this episode, because we are about to enter a phase with a lot of storms, and so from this stage I can actually mainly remember bad things, but it's nice to see in retrospect that we had such great moments there too, which is definitely nice. Here is the same view as before again from the other side, so this is the same mountain as there, so we stood somewhere here and looked like in this direction, and now we're looking out from the other side, and I always think that something like this is particularly cool when I see how much progress I make. That was particularly nice to see in the desert because you could really see from a very great distance where the trail went because there were no trees to block your view. And you could really see it. I mean, it's amazing. I was there yesterday and I'm here today, That's kind of cool to see that. I also had that once in Iceland where we walked through the Sprengisando desert, where you can sometimes, when you're standing on the mountains, I don't know, but it felt like you could see 3 days of walking because the desert is super flat, and when you're high up, you can see, I don't know, like 100 kilometers or so. And I always find that very cool when you see the distance that you have covered with relatively little effort. Now we're heading back into the change in the surrounding area. We were also entering volcanic areas now, and you can already see here that there were more of these scree, rocky, places, just like we had at Sonora Pass. And I really liked that. And then there was this cool moon rising here, and I thought that was really a great sight. So, if it weren't for the plants here, you'd somehow be able to think that you were on another planet looking into a Martian landscape or whatever. And I always like and think these views are very spectacular when you're in somewhat otherworldly, hostile regions and you can just wander through them with little effort. And I think this is kind of cool. Yeah, I remember here I was really happy about this flower meadow at one moment, and because we had just come out of this dry area. And then when you see flowers like this and green meadows like this, you always know straight away, okay, there's water some here. And that was always a very welcome change when you're walking through a dry area. It wasn't nearly as dry as in a desert, of course, but there were stretches where we had to check again how much water we need to take from a source, and we hadn't had that in a long time except at Sonora Pass. And we slowly got used to it again. So, in the Sierras, there was water everywhere. We never checked the maps for water, and you just said, come on, if I don't have any more water, then the next stream will come along within the next 500 yards or so. And that was usually how it was. So water was no concern at all. And so it changed again here. And then it was when these wonderful storms started. It was the beginning of a series of storms over multiple days, and it was completely crazy. You could tell when the weather was getting bad. The clouds came in, and of course, and then it looked like rain, and at some point it started to thunder. And when I was here at this lake, 2 thunderstorms came from different directions and literally unloaded over the lake, crashed into each other, and it was an inferno. You can't even imagine it. It was lightning and thunder, and we sat there and thought, wow, this is such a force of nature. And it was kind of scary too. And then the hail started at the end after the thunderstorm, and we sat there for quite a long time and until it was going to stop, because you just don't want to get any further in this weather. And we had slightly coverage from the trees, and it was also relatively cold. And well, it was quite the adventure, and it was only day 1 of a series of 4 days where we had actually really heavy thunderstorms every afternoon, and that was kind of frustrating. In the morning it was always nice again, and you thought, okay, it's over, But yeah, here you can see it. So we woke up in the morning and then walked the first 2 miles, and then we passed here and had this great view back to Lake Tahoe, which was a very nice feeling to see it from the distance. It's this part of the trail where the PCT runs along the Tahoe Rim Trail. And yeah, it was just nice to see Tahoe again after we had such a great time by the lake. But as I said, it was only ever in the morning when the weather was nice. And yeah, here you can see Tahoe again in the background, and it's already the weather is already getting bad again. And well, a few seconds later, the whole view has gone to hell again, and then you kind of started to think about where to shelter next. Of course, you couldn't take shelter all the time because you wanted to cover some distance, of course, but yeah, I show you here. Vor einer Minute konnte ich hier noch ins Tal sehen. Jetzt ist hier alles voller Blätter. Das sieht echt... So, da ist Lake Tahoe. Und ich stehe... Yeah, it happened so quickly. It was really crazy. 1 minute you had sunshine, and suddenly a few minutes later it was completely overcast, and somehow it was always exactly when I was at the most exposed places of all. I don't know why. So here, shortly after this video, I think a thunderstorm started again, and when I was walking over this ridge line, and of course, it's not a nice feeling to be exposed in a thunderstorm. Yeah, as I said in another video already, I really liked it when there were drops on plants, and they make such a beautiful picture. And here it was somehow even symmetric through the symmetry of the plant, and I really liked that. But nonetheless, I would have preferred no rain and especially no thunderstorms, even though it meant I had no views, no sights like this. But well, that's all part of it. And as I said, there was always nice weather phases, and that was also very good because everything was wet. And you know, I didn't have a waterproof backpack, so these Osprey backpacks, they are really great and sturdy, but they are just water repellent. So if it really pours on them for an hour or so, they are soaked. And the tent was always wet and so on, and it was nice to have dry phases in between to dry all of your stuff. Nevertheless, the landscape was awesome, and I can remember it really well here. This particularly spectacular ridge line I was hiking along, and you know, it's so awesome to hike along a ridge like that and then look into this expanse of a landscape. It's awesome. And I think it was lava rock, I'm not sure. But we hadn't been in a volcanic area like this before, and it was really nice to have a change of scenery. Yeah, another thing I remember, well, the trail in the Sierras is in really good shape, you know, which makes sense because that's where most of the people are because of the John Muir Trail. And also, I think many PCT hikers leave the trail at some point and don't finish it, but most of them try to get through the Sierras because it's kind of a highlight for most of the people. And I think people who are struggling and people who are thinking about leaving the trail, some of them probably do after the Sierras. And so the trail in the Sierras is very well maintained, and in Northern California it was really often the case that you had to climb over down trees, or that the trail itself wasn't in such a good condition with lots of stones and rocks and everything. But I thought it was kind of cool because it made the whole thing a bit more interesting. You know, otherwise the PCT is often really like a walking trail in a park. It's great because you can make fast progress, but the wilderness factor is a bit decimated. And yeah, I did enjoy having some challenges while hiking. Yeah, this is just another little video about this landscape I was talking about earlier. Just really beautiful. Yeah, but you can see from my face with the thunderstorms and the rain and everything, that was, it was like a gray shadow hanging over this part of the trail. And it was really, especially those 4 days in a row, they were so wet and so rainy that at some point that really affected my motivation and my mood. And so much that at some point I really wasn't in the mood anymore to do anything. But I think crises like this are inevitable on such a long journey. And you can only appreciate the good days if you also have some bad days. And I can remember it very well here when it was once again completely stormy. And luckily we were on this highway, and there was a little a covered area by a roof at a warehouse or something like that. And so we arrived there with the umbrella, the rain jacket, and the ground sheet wrapped around our legs. So we got there and huddled under this little canopy or whatever it was, and people kept coming by in their cars asking us if we wanted to get a ride to town, back to Tahoe. But, we had to cover quite a distance still on this day, because we wanted to pick up a package in Sierra City. And the problem was that we would arrive there on Friday if we kept on hiking. And if we didn't, we would have had to wait until Monday for the post office to reopen. And we didn't want to wait 2 days just to receive our package. And also we didn't want to take another break so soon after this long break in Tahoe. We just stayed there. But at some point the guy came back, this stoner who shuttled us to the trailhead from South Lake Tahoe. And I guess he had the right instinct and knew that there were some hikers hanging around this place and wanting rides or whatever. And so we just hang out in his car, and that was really nice because he had the heating on and everything, and we were able to get through the worst of the storm, which actually lasted for several hours. It was very long. But at some point we could hike on, and so we did. And we passed this hut in between, which would have been really nice to spend the night in there. Another hiker was already there and had made a fire in the fireplace, and it was nice and warm. But unfortunately, it was 7 miles too early for us. So, as I mentioned, we still had miles to go to get to the post office, and that's why we only took a break there, dried some clothes and so on, and then unfortunately, with a heavy heart, we went on again in the evening. But there was just no other way. Other than that, we would have had to do a really long day the next day, and we weren't in the mood to do that after our long break in South Lake Tahoe. So this is a typical water filtering situation. I'm sure all of you know it. I was really annoyed at some point by filtering water because it took such a long time, and the more you filter through the filter, the more it clogs. And of course you can backflush it, but it just takes longer with time. And I was always annoyed by that. But it has to be done. You need water. And then we slowly made our way towards Sierra City, the next town stop. It's a very small village, a bit away from the PCT. And as I said, we wanted to get our resupply package there. And when I got to the road crossing and wanted to walk down to the town, there was this coyote, and he wouldn't leave me alone. He chased me. He ran parallel to me to Sierra City, and every time I stopped, he stopped and looked. And the thing is, coyotes, well, sometimes they attack people. It's super rare, but I've read about it before that somehow, for example, I think the few years before that, a female hiker was somehow pulled out of a public toilet by a pack of coyotes and got killed. And that's the kind of thing that haunts your mind. But it was clearly only a solitary coyote, and I thought it was kind of cool too, because it's an interesting animal. But it was definitely watching me and following me for a while. But I think it was just curious in retrospective. Anyway, we then arrived in Sierra City, and that was really a nice town stop. It was this is the country store here, which is basically the point of where everything is. The post office, I think, is back here. And at the country store, there is food, there's Wi-Fi and everything. and behind it was the church, and you could camp next to it on the church courtyard, so to speak. And it looked like a small festival because it was a very small area only, and there were so many tents and just cramped and set up very close to each other. So I pitched a tent there too, and then we spent a very relaxing evening in Sierra City. And I remember that I started an extra hiker box for a hiker friend of mine who had run out of money, and I collected a bit of food from everyone and I gave it to him later, and he was very happy. Yep, but this is where we end this episode for now, and we'll continue in the next episode, I think up to Belden, but I'm not sure. Northern California is somehow all a bit of a blur in my head. But as always, if you liked it, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and if you have something to say or questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, and otherwise, I see you in the next video. Ciao!